Today we'll be going over some of the hardest to earn seasonal achievements. Since seasonal and holiday events only occur for a limited time of the year, players only have a brief window of time to actually complete them, which adds another layer of difficulty since they are essentially time gated and you have to remember to do them while they're up. And at number 10, we have the achievement Tricks and Treats of Azeroth. This achievement can only be earned during Hallow's End, which is essentially WoW's equivalent of Halloween, and is active around the last 2 weeks of the month of October. This achievement requires the player to complete a quest called Candy Bucket from many different candy buckets in different inns across the Eastern Kingdoms, Calavera, and Outland. The name of this achievement is a little bit of a misnomer since Outland is not Azeroth, but because achievements weren't added into the game until Wrath, the Vanilla and Burning Crusade candy buckets were lumped together into one achievement. In addition to Wrath, the Cataclysm to Pandaria expansions have their own achievements for collecting candy buckets as well. However, these achievements are much less intensive to do than what is required for the Tricks and Treats of Azeroth achievement. At most inns, there will be a candy bucket with a quest over it. Upon clicking on the candy bucket, you'll get a quest also called Candy Bucket. Turning in the quest may reward you with a handful of treats, or a trick by transforming you for 30 seconds. The handful of treats can contain masks, tricky treats, wands, toothpicks, and candy, amongst several other things. Most of these items are used in other achievements during Hallow's End, so you might want to keep them. While there are slight variations for the Horde and Alliance in terms of numbers of inns and various locations, in total, a player will need to fly around 3 continents and collect some 75 candy buckets or so. On average, there are usually roughly 2 candy buckets per zone, and with the vanilla zones in the Eastern Kingdoms, Calamdor, and Outlands, those numbers add up fast. Overall, this achievement isn't necessarily hard to obtain, but it does require perseverance, since it takes a lot of time and effort, especially if you haven't explored these areas yet or are unfamiliar with them. Tricks and Treats of Azeroth is a required achievement for the Hallow's End Mendo achievement, Hallowed Be Thy Name. And at number 9, we have a grouping of 4 achievements which can only be earned during the Midsummer Fire Festival. These 4 achievements are called the Fires of Azeroth, Desecration of the Alliance, and Desecration of the Horde. The Midsummer Fire Festival occurs around the Northern Hemisphere's summer solstice, and the endgame event lasts for around 2 weeks in late June and early July. These achievements are similar to previous achievements at the number 10, Tricks and Treats of Azeroth. However, these Midsummer Fire Festival achievements require a great deal more flying and questing to complete, so they're tougher than Tricks and Treats of Azeroth, and because of that are at number 9 on this list. During the Midsummer Fire Festival, there are bonfires that appear in every zone. These bonfires are usually close to a city, town, or camp, and there's usually 2 bonfires in any contested zone. One bonfire for the Alliance and the other bonfire for the Horde. At each bonfire, the player can either honor the bonfire it's in for the faction, or extinguish the bonfire if it belongs to the opposite faction. Players can do this in each zone with a short quest. As such, the Horde and Alliance versions of these achievements are, once again, slightly different, since many locations are different, but overall, the 2 achievements are very similar. To obtain the Fires of Azeroth achievement, the player needs to honor all of the bonfires for 5 different subzone achievements. For Alliance players, they need to earn 5 Flame Warden achievements, and Horde players need to earn 5 Flamekeeper achievements. Since Cataclysm, the Fires of Azeroth achievement requires the player to honor all of the bonfires in the Eastern Kingdoms, Calamdor, all the Cataclysm zones, Northrend, and Outland. Technically, both factions' versions of these achievements are inherently different since the bonfires are in different places and sometimes even in different zones. But all 4 achievements require traversing all of the aforementioned continents, zones, and worlds and honoring or extinguishing the 2 factions' bonfires there. Every expansion has received another achievement for honoring and desecrating bonfires, with the exception of Shadowlands. Doing all the bonfires of the 5 continents from Vanilla and the first 3 expansions of WoW are currently required for the meta achievement Fires of Azeroth. This means in addition to the 100+ bonfires listed, bonfires can still be found in the Broken Isles, Draenor, Kul Tiras, Pandaria, and Zandalar. Overall, this achievement is super difficult and hard to complete because it can easily take several hours, especially without teleports and multiple Hearthstones. The Fires of Azeroth and the Desecration achievement of the Others faction's fires are required achievements for the Midsummer Fire Festival meta achievements Flamekeeper for the Horde and Flame Warden for the Alliance. And at number 8, we have the achievement The Masquerade, which is another achievement from Hallow's End. When looting the candy buckets discussed at the number 10 spot, players have a chance to receive 16 different wands. Each hollowed wand has 5 charges and will transform the targeted player into a mob from the wand's name. For example, a hollow wand skeleton will give the player a costume of a spooky scary skeleton. This costume lasts for 1 hour and can easily be removed by right-clicking off the buff. The costumes unfortunately do not persist through death. For this achievement, the player only needs to be transformed into 7 of these creatures: a bat, a ghost, a leopard gnome, a ninja, a pirate, a wisp, and a skeleton. Each of these wands only has a 2% chance to drop from each candy bucket, meaning you might not get all 7 hollowed wands you need for the achievement, even if you visited every single candy bucket in-game. These wands can also be obtained from doing the Hallow's End dailies and drop from the Headless Horseman. To make matters worse, hollowed wands are soulbound so they cannot be traded to or bought from other players. Additionally, the player cannot cast a wand effect on themselves, which means they must have someone else do it for them. Finally, players could only loot 1 candy bucket once per hour. All of this made the Masquerade achievement especially hard when it was added in Wrath of the Lich King. Since the drop rate of most of the Hallowed Wands was so low, and the wands only had 5 charges, it was almost impossible to earn this achievement. Blizzard eventually saw this, and as bad luck protection, they added 2 vendor NPCs to the faction capitals in Cataclysm. Stymie is located in Stormwind, and Darla is located in the Undercity. Both these NPCs sell all of the Hallowed Wands in the game for 2 tricky treats each. On average, 1 candy bucket gives 2 to 3 tricky treats, so you should have enough to buy all the Hallowed Wands if you visit several candy buckets and do not spend your tricky treats on other goodies. So in order to get the achievement, most players will have to make or find a group of other players to do all 7 required wands. Luckily, however, there are usually several pre-made groups in the group finder that are working on this achievement during Hallow's End. This actually makes it one of the most social achievements in the game to get, since you have to go out of your way to ask another player that has the wands and how many charges they have left on their wands. Still, it might take a bit of your time to find that one last player that has the wand you need to earn your achievement. In Warlords of Draenor, several more Hallowed Wands were added to the game, including the Abomination, Geist, Ghoul, Slime, Spider, Banshee, Gargoyle, Nerubian, and White Wands. Since Cataclysm and the addition of the bad luck vendors, this achievement has been considerably less difficult. But that doesn't mean it's still easy to get and find groups of nice players that have the wands you need. You could also say it's become easier since each expansion has usually added more candy buckets to the game. This means any new player can now receive more tricky treats than anyone was able to in Cataclysm, which means players can buy even more wands to help out their friends, guilds, and strangers. Because this achievement was so difficult to earn in Wrath, and because it forces a lot of players to go outside of their comfort zone to ask other players to help, it is at the number 8 spot on this list. And at number 7, we have the achievement, A Mask for All Occasions, which is also another achievement from the Hallow's End event. The candy bucket located in inns that drop tricky treats and other goodies during Hallow's End have a less than 1% chance to drop one of 24 different masks. As of Cataclysm, the player has to wear 24 of these masks to earn the achievement, A Mask for All Occasions. The currently required 24 masks include all 12 of the playable races in the game during Cataclysm, with a male and female for each. There are 6 Alliance races, Draenei, Dwarf, Gnome, Human, Night Elf, and Worgen, and 6 Horde races, Blood Elves, Goblins, Orcs, Taurens, Trolls, and Undead. Like the Hallowed Wands in the previous entry, these masks are soulbound and cannot be traded or bought from other players. As a tangent, thank goodness Blizzard has not changed the requirements for this achievement by adding new masks for each new race or allied race. Since Cataclysm, 11 new races or allied races have been added to the game as of patch 9.2 and of the writing of this video. Yet Blizzard decided to expand this achievement in current WoW and included adding Demon Hunter masks that would double the mask requirement for the achievement to a total of 48 masks. And that's not even including the Drakthir and Dragonflight. A total of 50 masks needed for A Mask of All Occasions, and 10.0 would be a very spooky thing indeed for Hallow's End achievement. Some of you might be thinking, wait, isn't that achievement pretty easy to get? And while in current WoW it is, we need to look at the history of the achievement to understand it. When the achievement A Mask for All Occasions was added to the game in Wrath of the Lich King, it only required 20 masks, since the Worgen and Goblin races were not playable yet. However, this achievement was also considerably harder to get during Wrath of the Lich King because there was no bad luck protection. As mentioned, considering each mask has a less than 1% chance to drop from a candy bucket, and A Mask for All Occasions required 20 different masks in Wrath, just the chance you would get more than a couple of masks to drop is extremely small, no matter how many candy buckets you visited. In fact, this achievement was so hard to get that in Cataclysm, Blizzard turned the tricky treats into a currency and added vendors so players could just buy the masks. The Hallow's End vendors Blizzard added in Cataclysm are Spanky, who's located in Stormwind in the Valley of Heroes, and Farina, who's located in the Undercity Courtyard. Each mask only costs 2 tricky treats. As such, the achievement in current WoW is very easy to obtain as long as the player visits enough candy buckets. At the most, 48 tricky treats would be required to buy all the masks, provided none of the masks drop while farming the tricky treats. Masks can be obtained by doing Hallow's End dailies and defeating the Headless Horseman, but buying them with tricky treats is by far the easiest way to get them and provide you with a specific one. The mask vendors also sell Murloc, Naga, Ogre, and Vicryl masks for 5 tricky treats each. These masks are not required for the achievement, but do give the player a minor buff to agility, intellect, stamina, and strength respectively. Luckily, this achievement is not required for the Hallow's End meta achievement, Hallowed Be Thy Name, although it originally was briefly in the very beginning of Wrath of the Lich King. It seemed even Blizzard realized how hard this achievement was due to the pure RNG back then and had to remove it. Because of how hard it was to achieve in Wrath, and still requires a considerable amount of farming to get even now, A Mask for All Occasions does make it at number 7. And at number 6, we have a collection of 4 achievements which are all thematically very similar, so we decide to lump them together. These achievements are Fistful of Love, Shake Your Bunny Maker, Check Your Head, and Let It Snow, from the holiday events Love is in the Air, Noble Garden, Hallow's End, and the Feast of Wintervale respectively. To get all these achievements, the player must use seasonal items on specific players, which we'll discuss in detail. All 4 of these achievements are required for the respective meta achievements for their holiday event as well. The first of these achievements is called Shake Your Bunny Maker, which can only be earned during the holiday event of Noble Garden, which is something akin to a spring festival and Easter. To earn this achievement, players must collect brightly colored eggs in specific areas near certain cities to get Noble Garden chocolate. For 50 Noble Garden chocolates, spring flowers can be bought from Noble Garden vendors. Spring flowers have 16 charges, and players must use them to place bunny ears on all of the 12 races in the game as of Cataclysm. Cataclysm. The only caveat is that the players have to be at least level 18, which is an obvious reference to 18 being the legal US age for all sorts of things. Shake Your Bunny Maker is required for the Noble Garden meta achievement Noble Gardener. Up next is the achievement Check Your Head, the last achievement from the Hollow's End on this list. This achievement requires a player to use a weighted jack-o'-lantern on 12 different Cataclysm races. The achievement is slightly easier than some of the other ones in this entry since the weighted jack-o'-lanterns can be traded and sold to other players. While there are no vendors that you can buy weighted jack-o'-lanterns from, they do have a high chance to drop from candy buckets, hollow and daily activities, and killing the Headless Horseman. Additionally, the weighted jack-o'-lanterns are available all year long and do not despawn once the Hollow's End event is over. This stylish pumpkin hat lasts for 1 hour, and when applied, the player can hear the Headless Horseman laughing. Check Your Head is required for the Hollow's End meta achievement Hallowed Be Thy Name. The next two achievements are much harder than the last two in this entry, but are also very similar in nature. This is because these achievements require specific race and class combinations, as opposed to just 12 different races. The Fistful of Love achievement is from the holiday event Love is in the Air. This world event is the equivalent of Valentine's Day in WoW. For this achievement, the player must acquire a handful of rose petals and use them on 11 specific race and class combinations. These combinations are as follows: Gnome Warlock, Human Death Knight, Orc Shaman, Undead Warrior, Blood Elf Mage, Dwarf Hunter, Orc Death Knight, Night Elf Priest, Tauren Druid, Troll Rogue, and Draenei Paladin. The handful of rose petals can be purchased from a lovely merchant during the Love is in the Air world event for 5 rose petals for 2 love tokens. Love tokens can be acquired from the holiday dailies or can be purchased from any lovely merchant for 1 lovely charm bracelet each. Using the handful of rose petals is also required for the achievement named Flirt with Disaster. Both of these achievements are part of the meta achievements for Love is in the Air named Fool for Love. The bouquet of red roses generates the same effect as a handful of rose petals and can be used to complete the same achievements. While the bouquet of red roses does have a 5-minute cooldown, it has infinite uses. The handful of rose petals only has 5 uses, but it has a much shorter cooldown of 30 seconds. The final of these 4 achievements at number 6 is Let It Snow from the holiday event Feast of Wintervale. The Feast of Wintervale is a WoW amalgamation of Christmas and other seasonal holidays in December. This achievement requires the player to use a handful of snowflakes on each of the following race/class combinations: Orc Death Knight, Tauren Shaman, Undead Rogue, Gnome Mage, Blood Elf Warlock, Human Warrior, Night Elf Druid, Troll Hunter, Dwarf Paladin, and Draenei Priest. Let It Snow achievement was interestingly added in 2.3 before most achievements were added in Wrath of the Lich King. The achievement Let It Snow is also required for the Feast of Wintervale meta achievement Merrymaker. To acquire a handful of snowflakes, the player must simply type /kiss while targeting a Winter Reveler, who are located in most inns during the Feast of Wintervale. Winter Revelers will randomly give you a stack of 5 mistletoe, 5 fresh holly, or a handful of snowflakes, which contains 5 snowflakes after the player types /kiss at them. Only the Winter Revelers in the inns participate, and they must be standing under or near the mistletoe hanging from the ceiling. When the player receives one of these gifts, they will also receive a debuff preventing you from getting another one of these gifts for 1 hour. This hour is real time, so you can switch characters and come back an hour later. However, the snowflakes unfortunately cannot be mailed to alts. The Shower Snowflakes effect buff lasts for 2 minutes. As a side note, the snowflake effect is only an animation effect, and there is no direct numeric game effect for it. Snowflakes do expire and they will only last for 10 days. Finally, this achievement can only be done during Wintervale, because the player will not get credit for using snowflakes with the achievements targets outside of the holiday event. Since you'll be hunting for all these specific race and class combinations throughout the seasonal holidays, you really will have no other place to go, so let it snow. What makes these 4 achievements at number 6 so difficult are a variety of different factors. The first is a faction imbalance. Since many servers are home to a lopsided majority of players from their one faction, just going out in the world and finding players of the opposite faction may be quite difficult on some servers or shards. Of course, players can go to the other faction cities, but this requires stealth and trying as hard as possible not to be detected. Yet another option is queuing for arenas or battlegrounds to be able to spot and target the specific player requirements needed. But this brings all the disabilities of trying to PvP or avoid PvP while trying to earn the achievement. Dying too fast, wasting certain holiday resources like snowflakes, and other issues quickly become apparent when you try to earn the achievement this way. In fact, trying to PvP while doing holiday event achievements will make up most of this video from here on out. And at number 5, we have the achievement With a Little Helper from My Friends, which is an achievement that is also only available during the Feast of Wintervale. This achievement requires the player to get 50 honorable kills while under the festive gnome costume. This costume can be obtained from any of the PX239 Winter Wondervault found in around cities around Azeroth. The buff lasts for 30 minutes and turns the player into a stylish gnome with the flavor text reading Happy Holidays. This gnomifier allows players to be Santa's, Grandfather Winter's, little elves. Here's a barrage where every PX239 Winter Wondervault can be found from every Wintervale. Both Northrend and Legion Dalaran, Dun Moreau, just outside the gates of Ironforge, Orgrimmar, near the Flightmaster, Eversong Woods, just outside Silvermoon City, the Exodar outside the eastern entrance, Shatrath across the eastern bridge, Stormwood City at the ramp to the Griffin Roost, Stranglethorn Vale on the docks of the Booty Bay, Tanaris just east of the Gadget Sand, Tearsful Glades just off the eastern Zeppelin Tower, and finally the Wetlands near the docks of Menethil Harbor. Alliance players will always have red outfits, and Horde players will always have green outfits, which seems a little counterintuitive since red is the Horde's faction color. If you really want to RP as a Christmas elf gnome for some reason, for 5 merry supplies, players can purchase little helpers from Izzy Hazelfizzle and add a PX239 Winter Wondervault to a level 3 WAD garrison. This enables access to the costume all year round and opens up being able to complete the achievement from beyond Feast of Wintervale. What makes this achievement so difficult is because of all the PvP and how one requires the buff. The easiest way to earn this achievement is to enter any battleground or arena with a buff up. In addition, the buff is only 30 minutes long, and time can pass quickly just waiting for queues. Dying removes the buff, and it can only be reapplied at the Winter Wondervaults. With a little helper from my friends can be hard to achieve because the player must always have the buff up when they kill someone, which is far easier said than done. This means the player must not die at all if they want to keep the buff up for the entire duration of the arena or battleground. And while staying alive is an objective in PvP, it isn't necessarily an easy objective to complete. Luckily, honorable kills are pretty easy to get in modern WoW, since all player has to do is do any damage to a player that then dies. This will reward the player with some honor, but will only award you for credit for the achievement if you're still wearing the gnome costume. Finally, be warned that any form of shapeshifting, even done unintentionally, will also cancel the effect and buff. As such, druids and shamans will have the most difficult time earning this achievement, since it begins to limit gameplay mechanics and abilities for these classes. This achievement's name is an obvious reference to the Beatles song named With a Little Help from My Friends, which came out in 1967. A Little Helper from My Friends is required achievement for the Feast of Wintervale meta achievement, which is named Merrymaker. Overall, this achievement can be quite frustrating and take a while. Any death in PvP will remove the costume, which makes getting any killing blows in the incidents after that essentially worthless in terms of getting credit for the achievement. And with this achievement being a very heavy PvP requirement achievement, and PvP not being everyone's cup of tea, this can be especially hard for players to accomplish. And at number 4, we have the achievement Calavera from the micro-holiday Day of the Dead. This short holiday usually lasts for 1 to 2 days and always occurs right after Hollow's End. Day of the Dead is heavily inspired by the Mexican holiday of Dia de los Muertos, the name even being a direct translation. The Calavera achievement requires players to be wearing a contender's costume while they defeat or kill 50 other players who are also wearing one of the costumes. This achievement was added to WoW in the Warlords of Draenor expansion, but the holiday has been in the game since Wrath of the Lich King. To earn this achievement, a player must first purchase one of the 5 different contender costumes from Chapman. Chapman is an undead vendor who appears in most capital city graveyards only for the duration of Day of the Dead. Each of these costumes costs 100 gold, but they are also toys that bind to the player's account. Currently, there are the Night Demon, Purple Phantom, Bloom Rose, Snowy Owl, and Santos Sun contenders costumes. All of these costumes being toys makes it so players can use them to easily reapply the costume by placing the toy on their action bar. Needless to say, this achievement requires a lot of PvP. While it is very similar to the achievement With a Little Helper for My Friends, it differs in a few key ways. First, the player must duel or get a killing blow on another player while wearing the costume, rather than just anyone. Secondly, the PvP must be done in the open world since Blizzard removed being able to use the costumes in battlegrounds in 2021 for some reason, which is very irritating. Luckily, there are a few ways in which Blizzard has made this achievement easier to get. There are currently 5 contender costumes which are all different toys. All grant 1 hour buffs and all have a cooldown of 1 minute. Calavera is actually the 3rd out of this series of achievements. The first of these achievements is To the Afterlife, which requires a player to defeat 1 other contender with a costume on. The next achievement is Vientos, which requires players defeating 20 players who are also wearing the costume. The Calavera achievement is unique because it is the only achievement on the list to be featured in a much shorter holiday. Most holiday events last for several weeks, but Calavera can only be obtained for 2 days of the entire year. The easiest way to get this achievement is to form a group with other players outside the gates of Orgrimmar or Stormwind and take turns killing each other while everyone is wearing the costume. After dying and resurrecting, the other player can then reapply the buff to themselves and kill you. Then you can repeat this 49 more times. Don't forget to remove all your armor to get rid of inflated stats, especially health. All of this depends upon several factors, of course. First is finding fellow willing participants. Second is making sure there isn't any world PvP going on around you to disrupt or detract from your own killing. Third is simply the time and commitment required, which is a lot. This achievement is hard because not only are there always so few people doing this achievement, but you only have a day or 2 to actually do it. Additionally, the opposing faction also usually likes to invade cities during this time. So if you befriend, maybe consider farming this achievement far off in the open world in a dead zone so you don't have to worry about other players in war mode. Of course, war mode is completely optional. You can get the achievement by just winning 50 duels, but you're much more likely to find PvP players when you're in war mode where they actually do PvP. This achievement is a niche achievement in a niche environment, in a niche player base and style, in a niche time frame, so it makes sense grind for this achievement is fairly difficult. And at number 3, we have the achievement School of Hard Knocks. This achievement is from the holiday event Children's Week, which usually runs through early to mid-May. On a somewhat interesting note, this is the only holiday event to not really have an equivalent in the real world. The requirements of the achievement state, take your orphan into a battleground and complete the feats listed below. Capture the flag in Eye of the Storm, assault a flag in Arathi Basin, assault a tower in Alterac Valley, and return a fallen flag in Warsong Gulch. This achievement is considered one of the hardest to get in the game, and for good reason. First, the player must start a Children's Week questline by adopting a child at various orphanages around Azeroth and Outland. Once they've adopted the child, the player will receive a whistle which they can use to summon their new companion. The player must then queue for 4 specific battlegrounds, which greatly increase wait times and hampers rewards for completing them. During the actual battleground, players must have the orphan summoned when doing the activity. Dying will cause the orphan to despawn as well. This means players must remember to resummon the orphan every time they die. In addition to the regular mechanics of competing in a battleground, you must also compete against other players trying to earn the same achievement. Since the School of Hard Knocks can only be earned during Children's Week, this means other players will be trying to do the exact same thing you are doing. This isn't including the opposing faction, but your own faction as well. This often means racing to achieve a specific requirement before anyone else can in the battleground. And all of the requirements can only be done a certain number of times per battleground as well. Capturing a flag in either storm must mean the player and their orphan survive a bloodbath to get the flag, successfully grab it, and then bring it back to the tower their faction controls to capture the flag. Assaulting a flag in Alterac Valley is somewhat harder, since there is usually only one flag that is not immediately contended when the battleground starts. This flag is the stables for Alliance and the farm for Horde. Assaulting a tower in Alterac Valley is by far the hardest requirement, since it requires the player and the orphan to not only stay alive and slip inside an enemy tower, but also capture the tower's flag and not be killed by other players or NPCs while doing so. Returning a fallen flag in Warsong Gulch means killing a player of the opposing faction who's carrying your team's flag. When that player dies, the flag will drop to the ground, and clicking on the flag will return it to your stronghold. It's recommended to keep the quest whistle to summon your orphan on your action bar so you can see it frequently. Remember to summon your orphan every time you die, otherwise you won't receive any credit. This achievement was so hard that Blizzard eventually removed the School of Hard Knocks from the Children's Week holiday event meta achievement for the children in 2022. And at number 2 is the achievement Turkey-Lurkey. This achievement is only available during Pilgrim's Bounty, which is akin to the American Thanksgiving holiday and falls around the same time period in late November. This achievement is similar to the number 6 achievement, but for this achievement the player must use a seasonal item on 10 rogues, each of different races. Each rogue must be a member from all of the 10 different races of Cataclysm when the achievement was last updated. That is, the player must find and Turkify a Night Elf rogue, Dwarf rogue, Gnome rogue, Human rogue, Goblin rogue, Blood Elf rogue, Orc rogue, Troll rogue, Undead rogue, and Worgen rogue. The consumable item the player uses to get the achievement is called a Turkey Shooter. When the player uses a Turkey Shooter on a rogue, it transforms the rogue into a turkey for 1 hour. The buff the rogue receives is called Turkey Feathers, and if it leaves the rogue in a foul mood, they can simply right-click it off to remove the effect. To complicate matters, Turkey Shooters only come from Pilgrim Bounty dailies and have 1 use. Additionally, the cast time of Turkey Shooter is 3 seconds, which is plenty long enough for your target to move too far away or vanish suddenly. The Turkey Shooter can also be interrupted by damage and interrupting abilities. In WoD, the Turkey Shooters were added to the Pilgrim Bounty's bag. These bags are awarded for doing one of Pilgrim Bounty's dailies and have 100% chance to drop 1 Turkey Shooter. Prior to Warlords of Draenor, the Turkey Shooter itself was only rewarded from the dailies. The Pilgrim's Bounty bag can also drop a frightened brush chicken pet and a toy as well. The toy is named the Silver-Plated Turkey Shooter and can also be used to earn the achievement Turkey-Lurkey. Both the pet and toy have a 3% chance to drop from the bag. The Silver-Plated Turkey Shooters also have a cast time of 3 seconds, and while it does have a 5-minute cooldown, it also has an infinite number of uses, making it quite handy for farming for the achievement rather than having to do a quest for one of the disposable regular Turkey Shooters. One final note of the Turkey Shooter items that disappears from the player's inventory when the Pilgrim Bounty event has ended. While we've covered various difficulties and obstacles related to targeting and using seasonal items in other players, this achievement is particularly hard because rogues themselves are such a small group of players. When was the last time you actually saw a dwarf rogue, for example? Theoretically, this achievement is harder than ever before because each new race and allied race added to the game means there are fewer specific rogues and class combinations online at any given time. Additionally, 3 new classes have been added to the game since Cataclysm, which are the Monk, Drakthir, and the Demon Hunter. This also means that technically less people will probably be playing rogues because they switched over to the new classes. Even if you find a rogue, it doesn't mean it will be in one of the 10 required classes anyway, since 2 new races and allied races have been added to the game since Cataclysm, most of which can also be rogues. Finally, Evokers with Dragonflight further makes this achievement all the much harder to get. With Evokers, the chance of theoretically finding a rogue decreases to 1 out of 13. And with all races being able to play a rogue in Dragonflight, in the future, any given rogue you see will only have a slightly higher than 50% chance to be one of the specific races from Cataclysm you need for the achievement. And if I did my math right, this means that in Dragonflight, any given player will theoretically be the specific one you need for the achievement 0.5% of the time. The easiest way to earn this achievement is to go to max level neutral city zones for the current expansion and use macros to target specific rogue players. Trying to spot rogues in PvP in battlegrounds and arenas can be quite difficult, especially since rogues like to use stealth and vanish. Turkey-Lurkey is by far one of the hardest achievements just because of the statistics to find the required players, with it arguably harder to accomplish every year. Turkey-Lurkey is still required for the meta achievement Pilgrim for the Pilgrim's Bounty. Perhaps Blizzard should look at changing the requirements in the future for this achievement to something much more easier, like use a Turkey Shooter on any 12 rogues of different races. And finally, at number 1, we have the achievement, They Really Love Me. This achievement can only be earned during the holiday event Love is in the Air. At the beginning of Warlords of Draenor, when the achievement was introduced, They Really Love Me required the player to be simultaneously the target of 50 other players' manufactured love prisms. An important note is that each manufactured love prism only has 50 charges. One manufactured love prism can be bought for 40 love tokens, which are the currency for Love is in the Air vendors. When the manufactured love prism was added in 6.0, it had a 1-minute cooldown and the buff it provided only lasted for 10 seconds. The name of this buff is called Love Ray, and its flavor text reads, "Someone likes me." This achievement is actually the third in a series of achievements. The first achievement is called Love Magnet and requires 10 love rays on a player. The next achievement is called Beacon of Love and requires 20 love rays. And the third and final achievement is They Really Love Me, which requires 50 love rays. Luckily in 6.2, the manufactured love prism was changed considerably. Its new cooldown was 30 seconds and the buff provided was now for 5 minutes, which is much longer than the original 10 seconds. In order to get the achievement, a player must theoretically form a raid group and have 50 people clicking their manufactured love prism within 10 seconds while targeting the player. There are some ways to cheese the actual number of players required when you include the various buff durations and players alternating applying the buffs to keep it refreshed, but the math is starting to get kinda complicated to talk about for a simple top 10 video. Since 6.2, there is much more room for variation in how to obtain this achievement. If the player brings one friend along with a fully 50 charge manufactured love prism and refreshes the buff every time the cooldown ends, every 30 seconds, it will in theory take exactly 25 minutes for the player to get the achievement. The way this works is because a love ray buff persists for 5 minutes and it gets refreshed with another stack every 30 seconds. Every additional player has this time. If a player was in a group of 5, including themselves, and all 4 of the players were constantly keeping the buff up, it would take 6.5 minutes. If a player was in a raid with 25 other people, it would take 1 minute. Of course, this requires every player being perfectly accurate and having enough charges to manufacture love prism. Overall, this is at number 1 because it used to be incredibly hard to get when it was first introduced, and still requires a lot of coordination with other players in order to get it even today. Although many could argue that School of Hard Knocks should definitely be number 1 instead. Alright, and that's it for this very long video. Now, there are a ton of achievements that could have been on this list. In fact, there's so many that we can't even list them all in our reasonings for not including them, since that would make this video even longer than it already is. We will, however, briefly mention some honorable mentions. These include 50 Coins of Ancestry, the Lunar Festival Elder Achievements, Spring Fling, Desert Rose, Torch Juggler, Pilgrim's Peril, A Caroling We Will Go, and finally BB King. We didn't include the meta achievements for what a long strange trip it's been for obvious reasons. Finally, technically you get achievement for a feat of strength when you obtain the Headless Horse's mount or a Brewfest mount, but we didn't include those either. So, did we miss any holiday event achievements that you consider especially hard? Have any ideas for future videos similar to this one? If so, let us know down in the comments below.